Hi, I'm Karen Pleasant, and I serve as the Managing Director of Alumni Impact with Teach for America in North Carolina. In my current role, I founded and lead our North Carolina Rise Fellowship. But before this chapter, I started my career in education as a middle school science teacher, helping eighth graders develop a love of science and learning through experimentation and exploration. As a teacher, I've been through many trainings, many conference sessions, and I walked away each time with a new strategy to add to my toolkit. I came into my classroom with lots of tools and lots of questions, but when it came time to figure out what to use, I had to figure out that problem on my own, absent of the folks who taught the development, provided the experiment, and knew the best way to use the tool. I had to figure out what to use and when to use it with the same experimentation and exploration that I taught to my eighth graders. And this same inquiry focus that I brought to my classroom has guided my work with our RISE Fellowship. And it's what I hope to teach you and experience with you in this session. RISE stands for Reinvesting in Student Excellence, and this fellowship supports our North Carolina alumni fellows across the state in strengthening their practice, growing as leaders, and creating excellent learning opportunities. Since its launch in 2022, RISE has supported 126 educators who have collectively reached more than 12,500 students across our state. In this past fellowship year, our fellows served more than 4,900 students using an inquiry process to guide the learning throughout their fellowship year. Our fellows completed student-facing impact projects grounded in action research. They started the experience with a meaningful classroom or school-based challenge that came based on what they experienced in their own buildings and classrooms. We supported them to narrow that challenge into a focused problem of practice to study research, study other classrooms, study best practices, and study the evidence that they collected in their own classroom in order to select and test a strategy they believed would move the needle for the students they teach. Then, in collaboration with a fellowship cohort and our North Carolina Rise coaches, we examined the results of that test and reflected on what fellows would change, sustain, or test next in their classroom. The goal with our teachers was not simply to complete a project, but to help teachers build the inquiry habits that guide learning practitioners in classrooms and school buildings all across this country. We learned that our teachers are much more invested when they're exploring a question that they genuinely wanted to answer. And we want to use that same exploration in a session with you, supporting you to examine a common learning, professional learning challenge that comes up for adult learners everywhere. Who holds the questions, the expertise, and the decision-making power? We want to engage you in your own inquiry practice where you'll explore the difference between assigning a project or a strategy to implement and supporting teachers to lead an investigation into their own practice. We'll introduce and unpack a practical inquiry cycle, one of noticing, narrowing, investigating, testing, studying, and adapting. The participants in this session will get to see examples of how broad classroom concerns can become focused inquiry questions. We'll walk through going from my students aren't engaged into how does using structured student choice during our independent work time affect the task completion and student participation of my eighth graders over the next 6 weeks. Will support participants once they've identified their own student-facing challenge stemming from their own context. We'll walk through practice, narrowing it into a focused problem of practice, identifying the strategy to test, the evidence that needs to be collected, and the reflection questions that would guide the next cycle of inquiry. And together, folks in the session will be each other's peer feedback on whether that inquiry is focused, measurable, relevant, and within that educator's sphere of influence. Participants in our session will learn how to frame a focused problem of practice, use a practical action research cycle, and build the coaching, evidence, peer feedback, and reflection structures that help teachers lead meaningful inquiry. You'll leave with the beginning of an inquiry experience that can be adapted for any classroom, school, district, or educator development program. We believe that teachers should not only receive professional learning, but should be supported to generate knowledge from their own classrooms. We believe that when that happens, professional learning becomes more relevant, more rigorous, and more connected to student impact. We've been doing this with fellows in North Carolina, and we'd love to do it with you in this session. I really hope to see you there.